In this video, we're actually going to set up onSubmit for the form, and that is going to allow us to dispatch the action that adds the expense, and then we'll redirect the user over to the dashboard page where they can view the new expense they added. So before we do that, I do want to make a quick change to the regular expression. Right now, we can actually start off the amount with a dot, and I don't want to allow that. I want to force at least one number to come before the dot. So to fix the regular expression, we just need to change this part right here. This asterisk says allow between 0 and infinity of whatever's just before, which is a number. So we could have no numbers, or we could have 10,000 numbers. What we really want is a range of 1 to infinity. And we're going to use the range operator to get that done. So I'm going to delete the asterisk. I'm going to open the curly braces just like we have here. On the low end, we're going to have 1, comma. On the high end, we're going to have infinity. And we actually just leave it empty to use infinity. Now we are no longer going to allow the dot to come first. There is one more small tweak we're going to need to make though, since we have made this change. So if I do type something in like dot, it's not going to register, but I can still do $123.50, for example. But if I highlight all of the text values and I hit the delete key, you can notice that nothing actually happens because this regular expression no longer matches just an empty string. So if we want the user to be able to clear the value, we're going to just add something up front. If there is no amount or the amount that is provided is a match, then we'll actually set it. So this is going to have the effect of allowing the user to clear the value. So if I type that same value in, select everything and hit delete, it actually goes away. The other thing we're going to tweak is the date. So with these two, we're going to require them to provide the values, and we're going to add an error message if they don't. But for date, we can currently just focus on the field and delete it. And there's really no good reason to do that. That's not a user experience we want to provide. And we can actually prevent this with a simple tweak to our code. So down below, we have onDateChange. OnDateChange is going to get called with the date if one was picked. If it was cleared, it's going to get called with nothing. So if we add an if statement, we can actually check if there's a value. If created at, then run some code. So right here, we're saying if there is a created at value, go ahead and actually use this .set state. If there's not, do nothing. So this is going to prevent the user from being able to clear that value. Now, when the browser refreshes and I click the input and hit the delete key, you can see nothing happens. It's not going away, but I can still change dates. So I can go into the past, I can go into the future. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and actually set up the onSubmit handler for the form. We're going to get that done using the onSubmit prop to our form down below. So onSubmit, we're going to run some code. We currently don't have that method defined. We will define it in just a second. We can reference it right now though, this .onSubmit. Now right here, we can actually create the handler. So we will set up onSubmit, and we're going to get some work done. I'm going to set it equal to an arrow function. Are we going to get an argument passed in? Yes, the E argument. And remember, for our forms, we do want to access E because we need to call E.prevent default. Otherwise, the browser is going to go through that full page refresh. So before I save, if I click the button, add expense, we go through that full page refresh. I'm going to go ahead and back up, save the file, and see what happens when I actually have the change in place. Now, if I click add expense, we don't go through the full page refresh. We're allowing us to handle this with JavaScript instead. Now we are going to be adding a little bit of validation. The only thing we're concerned about is whether or not there's a value for these two guys. If there's a value for description, great. We really don't care what the format is. If there's a value for amount, we already know it's in the right format because we've added the regular expression checking. We know they can't clear the date, so there's going to be something there, and the note field is optional, so it's perfectly fine to leave this completely empty. That means inside of here, we just need to add a single if statement to check both the description and the amount. So right here, if there is no description, this.state.description, or there is no amount, is no this.state.amount. If either of those are the case, we want to go ahead and render an error to the screen. So right here, set error state equal to, and we can use a string along the lines of please provide description and amount. Awesome. So we have this little error message in place. If there is no errors, right here, we will have the else case where we clear the error. And for the moment, we'll just add console.log submitted. So it's actually going to be your challenge to wire up the error handling just like we had in the previous video. I'll give you the first part. We're going to set up an error state equal to an empty string. It's going to be your challenge to set it here and clear it here. It's also going to be your challenge to conditionally render it. And you can put that wherever you like. I'm going to go ahead and toss it right here, how about? So go ahead and add a line here, a set state call, add one here as well, then conditionally render it and mess around with it over in the browser. Try to submit the form without a description and an amount, make sure you get the error, then type a value in for both and make sure the error goes away when you submit the form. Take some time to knock this out, test your work, and when you're done, click play. All right, how'd that one go? I'm going to kick things off by setting the error. That's going to happen right here. This dot set state, passing in our updater function. We are going to be setting just a single state value error, and we're going to go ahead and set that equal to a nice string message. So we can go ahead and use something along the lines of please provide description and amount. Now that we are setting the error, we want to make sure to clear it if there are no errors. That's going to happen right here. This dot set state. We will pass in that updater function. This time around, the only thing we're going to update is error, and we are just going to set it equal to an empty string. So now that we are setting and clearing the error message correctly, we have to actually use it. And that's going to happen right here with a little bit of conditional rendering. Now, I didn't tell you what exactly you should render. So what I'm going to do is just render the error in a paragraph tag. I can use the logical AND operator to get that done. This dot state dot error. If that does exist, if it's not just an empty string, then we're going to go ahead and render this little paragraph tag. And I'll dump the error message right inside. Once again, this dot state dot error. Perfect. Now we have our error handling set up. If I go ahead and actually submit the form, we get our message. If I type one of the values in and submit it, we still get the message. But if I type both values in and submit it, the message should go away and we get our little submitted console printing to the screen. So now that we have the dummy setup in place, let's go ahead and actually dispatch the action. Now, where's that going to happen? Well, it's actually not going to happen in this component because remember, the whole goal of expense form is to be reused in add expense page and the edit expense page. And in the end of the day, if we're adding or editing, we need to dispatch different stuff. So what we're going to do is just pass the data up. This is going to allow us to determine what to do with the data when the user submits the form on a dynamic basis. So for this component, we can dispatch the add expense action. For the other component, we can dispatch edit expense. That means right here, we are going to provide a single prop, which will be a function on submit. And we can set this up to work however we like since we're the ones creating it. So let's say it's a function, obviously. It gets called when the form gets submitted with valid data and we get that data back. So in this case, we would get the expense object back with all of the properties on it we would expect. Description, amount, note, and created at. Now all we have to do is actually call this one. So for now, I'll just console.log expense, making sure we dump it to the screen. Now we can actually wire things up. So where are we going to call this prop? We're going to call that prop right here where we have the submitted console.log. So that would be this.props.on submit, the one that we just passed down. We are going to go ahead and call it, and we are going to call it with some data. And we just decided we're going to call it with an object with all of those properties. So let's create an object with all of those properties. First up is description. Description is going to get its value directly from this.state.description. Now I mentioned directly from because we're not doing any parsing with this, unlike amount. So amount currently isn't in the format we want. Amount currently is a string, something like 123 or 123 point or 123.3 or 123.30. So what we need to do is actually get this into the right format. It's actually not that bad. What we need to do is use parse float, which is just like parse int, although instead of getting rid of the decimal places, it keeps those in place. This is going to take our string, this.state.amount, and get it over to a real number. And once again, we will provide the base. We are working in base 10. Now we have this number with decimal places. We're working in cents though, so we want to get rid of those. All we have to do is multiply it by 100, and now we're going to have the number in the format we expect. Next up on our list is created at. Now, created at is also going to require a little parsing too, because this .state.created at, it is not the timestamp we expect. It is currently a moment object. Now, there is a single moment method we can use to get the timestamp back. We can find that over in the moment documentation. We can get that up above. Right here, we have Unix timestamp in seconds or milliseconds. JavaScript works in milliseconds, so that's what we're going to be using. It is value of. So all we have to do right here is call value of, and now we are going to have just a regular number that represents that value. The last one is also an easy one. Note gets its value directly from this .state.note, and there we have it. We are all done. Now we can go ahead and actually save the expense form and test things out. We should see our log from over here printing with the object, and all of our data should be on there. I'll start off with the description. We can use rent. Then I'll add an amount. Let's say it's $10.95 and 25 cents. Let's say I change the date over to the 1st of the month, and I'll leave the note field empty. Now, if I hit add expense, what do we get right here? We do indeed get all of the information exactly as we would expect. We have our formatted amount, our formatted created at timestamp. We have our description, and we have the empty note. If I did add something in for the note and I submitted it again, that would indeed show up. So there's nothing left to do with the expense form. All the work left is going to happen right inside of here. The add expense page needs to be able to actually dispatch the given action to the Redux store, which means that we need to go ahead and actually import a few things from up above. Right here, I'm going to need to import the named export connect from React Redux, because remember, we do want to connect this component to the store so it can dispatch. So right here, we will call connect like we've done before. We don't need anything from the state, so we can leave the first parentheses empty. We do need to pass the component into the second one, so we'll do that. And now we have access to props.dispatch. We can access that up above. We can get the props in, and we can use that right here. So instead of console.logging something, we will use props.dispatch. Now, what are we trying to dispatch? An action, and we have an action generator already. We just haven't imported it. So I'm going to import that. Importing the add expense action generator we already created from the file we put it in. I have to go out of the components folder into the actions folder, and in there we have the expenses file, and that is the file that we want. Now, if you forget how that works, we set that up to take an object with those 4 properties, description, note, amount, and created at, which means that we're good to go. We can just take this argument and pass it through. Right here, add expense, passing in expense. Now we can actually save the file and check things out. I'm going to add my very first expense. Let's go ahead and toss in maybe coffee. I forget how much I paid. Let's say it was $2.58. I did buy it today, so we'll leave that there, and I don't need any notes for this one, so I'll leave that empty. Now, when we click add expense, don't get too excited. We're not going to get redirected just yet, but behind the scenes, it should have added the data. And if I go back to the dashboard, you should see the expense you added showing up. So here I have coffee. I have the correct value for the amount, and assumedly the correct value for the timestamp. Now that we have all of this in place, the last thing we're going to do in this video is actually automate that redirect. So when I do submit the create expense form, we want to kick you over to the dashboard page automatically. Now, we already explored that the components we render inside of React Router, they get access to a bunch of special props. We explored that when we looked at how we can set up URL parameters. If you forget, we can always use the React Dev tools to prove it. So right here, I can look for the add expense page component. I can see I have a ton of stuff passed in. And what we're going to do is use one of the history methods. So on history, we have push, and push is how we can programmatically change pages. So let's actually use this. We're going to access it over here. Right after we dispatch, we'll use props dot, and then we're going to access history. Then we're going to access push. Now, push does take a single string argument, and it's your path. So if I wanted to go over to the help page, I would use /help. If I want to go to the dashboard page, which I do, I would just use /. This is going to switch me over as if I clicked the link, which means we're not going to go through the full page refresh. It is going to switch over using browser routing. So now let's save the add expense page file for the final time and add another expense. Now remember, none of our data is persisted, so coffee has already been lost. Let's go ahead and add it back in. I'll add coffee. with an exclamation mark. The amount this time, let's go ahead and switch it over to 16 bucks. We'll keep the date as today, and I will add a note this time around, test note. Now, when I click add expense, I should get redirected, and I do right here. I'm at the expense dashboard page. I have coffee showing up. I have my outrageous price, and I do indeed have the timestamp. With this in place, the create expense page is now done. We have validation, we have our date picker, we have automatic redirect, and we were able to do all of that while also creating a component that we can reuse while editing our expenses. That's the topic we're going to focus on next. Let's take a quick moment to recap what we did. In this one, we just passed the data out of expense form. We did that by calling a prop that gets passed in from the parent. Now, why did we do this? We did this because we want to reuse expense form on add expense page and later on the edit expense page. Since both of these need to dispatch different actions, we've abstracted that part away from expense form. Right here, I just define the two-liner, what I want to do when the data is valid. We're going to do the exact same thing with edit expense page in just a little bit, and we'll be able to reuse a lot of the code from over here. So it's actually going to be a really easy process. Now, when we did dispatch, we actually added the data to the Redux store, and then we used the history push method to switch pages. Now, the back button is still preserved, so if I were to go back to the dashboard and go back again, I do go back to the create page. So as we use the history push method, it's just like someone clicked a link. So they can go back to view the page they came from. Now that we have all of this in place, we are all done for this video. I am very excited to continue on building out this real world app. So stay tuned and I'll see you in the next one.